welcome to the Wired briefing on the future of hybrid automotive vehicles. I'm Paul Henderson, a lifestyle journalist, and for many years I was the motoring editor on British GQ. For today's discussion, and over the next 30 minutes, my panellists and I will aim to bust some of the biggest myths about hybrids. Now, as many of you might know, the UK has committed to phasing out the sale of new petrol and diesel cars in the next few years. So many consumers will probably be wondering, is it the right time for me to get an electric car? Well, for some, making the leap to an all-electric vehicle might feel like a step too far. After all, they're generally more expensive, they take a long time to charge, and then there is that agonizing range anxiety to consider. However, while EVs have traditionally dominated the non-petrol market, hybrids have quietly and stealthily been catching up fast. And in some regions, the hybrid market is even outpacing early EV adoption. But are hybrids really the answer? On paper, they seem to offer the best of both worlds, an internal combustion engine and an electric motor, meaning improved fuel efficiency and reduced emissions. But there are questions to consider. Do they represent value for money? Do they offer a viable, sustainable alternative to EVs? And if we do opt for a hybrid, which version is the right one? So all in all, is it all just hype? Or is buying a hybrid the smart move right now? To find out, I'm joined by two industry experts who should be able to give us a steer. Rebecca Yates is a senior technology advisor for Castrol. She works with the Castrol leadership team and across the global Castrol technology teams to shape the development and deployment of future global products. And alongside Rebecca, we have William Ulstein. Will was appointed as the UK CEO at YouGov in September 2024. Prior to joining YouGov, Will held senior research and commercial positions at several leading market research agencies and startups. Rebecca, William, welcome to the Wired briefing.
Thanks. Hi.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me.
So, it may come as a shock for those of you that don't know, but hybrids aren't actually new, are they? I mean, Ferdinand Porsche built one in 1900. The Toyota Prius made the mainstream in 1997, most commonly as those beloved private taxis that we've all probably been in the back of at one point or another. And today, hybrid ranges from small family runarounds to hypercars capable of 280 miles an hour. And yet, according to YouGov, only 43% of people fully understand the difference between the various types of hybrid vehicles on the market. Let's start us off with some context, Rebecca. Can you outline the main types of hybrid available to UK consumers and explain how they're different?
Sure. As you say, hybrid technology isn't new, but it has been evolving and it has been growing, as we're going to talk about. So all hybrids have an internal combustion engine, an e-motor, and a battery. And how they differ is in how the powertrain configures those different components and how the system works to drive the vehicle using those components. So there's a mild hybrid electric vehicle, full hybrid electric vehicle, plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, and range extender electric vehicle. And I'll try and step through those quite simply. So the mild hybrid electric vehicle has a very small battery, about 0.2 kilowatts. And the e-motor is really there to bring instant boost for acceleration or from start. And the vehicle is mainly driven through the internal combustion engine. The battery is charged by the internal combustion engine and then what we call regenerative braking, which is putting the energy from braking back into the battery. If we then step to the full hybrid electric vehicle, which you described, as a typical taxi fleet vehicle, then that has still a small battery engine, about 2 kilowatts. The engine and the e-motor can operate in parallel through the transmission so that the vehicle can be working in EV-only mode, internal combustion engine, or both. The range here on EV mode is typically about 5 miles. They're highly efficient in urban driving conditions, which is why we see them being used in taxi fleets and other sort of city-type fleets. And then we go to plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, where the battery's much larger, 10 times larger, 20 kilowatt hour typical. And plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, like the name says, you can plug them in to charge the battery. They have more like 20 to 50 miles range on EV mode. So they're suitable for urban and extended city driving. And then on motorway, long drives, the internal combustion engine can kick in. The e-motor is still used for, that aggressive acceleration. And then the final type is range extender electric vehicles, where these are really a battery electric vehicle with a small internal combustion engine to charge the battery. Again, much bigger batteries, 40 to 60 kilowatt hours, and therefore the range typically 50 to 80 miles. So that's the different types and some of the different use cases.
Great. And you avoided using all the acronyms, which is something I'm very thankful for, because with the PHEV, MEV, REEV, they drive you mad, don't they? Definitions aside, Rebecca, what benefits or advantages would you say that each of the different versions provide for drivers?
Well, I think I've covered that a bit. So the full hybrid EVs are really extremely efficient in urban driving, and where there's lots of stop-start, lots of braking for the regen, to recharge the battery. PHEVs are really perfect for drivers who can take advantage of electric charging and good rates on grid for electric charging and have relatively short commutes, so that they can, use that battery in their short commutes, but then don't want to have that range anxiety of going on longer motorway drives and therefore being able to fall back on the internal combustion engine. So I think they're the kind of trade-offs that people can consider.
What's your experience of the pace of hybrid adoption? Are people buying them? Are people interested? And how does it differ across the different markets?
So although hybrids, as you said at the beginning, is quite old technology, since 2020, we've seen the share of new vehicle sales for hybrids really growing. So in Europe and US and China, we've seen like the share of new vehicle sales growing. In Europe in 2024, hybrids were about 35% of new vehicle sales. And in the US, they were 30% of new vehicle sales. And even in China, which is the world's biggest car market, and I think it's well known that in last year they reached 50% of their new vehicle sales actually being battery electric vehicle. Even there, the year-on-year sales, we're seeing big growth in the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle and the range extender electric vehicle, where the range extender electric vehicle is great for those consumers that want an electric vehicle, but with additional range, long range capability, and then they can still rely on the ICE to recharge. And it's also a good solution for the vehicle manufacturers who might have battery electric vehicle platforms and then they want to modify these to reduce the battery size and then package in an internal combustion engine.
Yeah, it's interesting. People are picking it up. It's been a slow burn, I think, but I think hybrids are really growing in popularity. Can I ask you a slightly different question? This is more from an industry perspective, which is how has Castrol adapted to the changing needs of these hybrid technologies?
Yeah, so it's been a really exciting area. As I talked about, each different hybrid has a very different operating cycle, and that means it has different needs for the lubricant. So we've actually been researching and developing new products for hybrids for over 25 years. For example, some of the things that it can mean for the oil is obviously hybrids have periods where the internal combustion engine is off. So there's intermittency. And this means from all the testing that we've done, one of the things that we've seen that is consistent across all the different hybrid types is that the engine oil temperature is significantly lower. And that actually means that more contaminants can get into the oil and stay in the oil. So you see higher levels of fuel, higher levels of water, and the oil needs to be able to handle those higher level of contaminants, needs to be able to protect the critical engine parts with a lot of stop-start, very high frequency stop-start, and actually needs to deliver like fuel economy when the engine is operating at very different speed load points. So we've pulled sort of our 25 years of testing, 2 billion data points together, and internally we've created our own oil standard, which we call high spec, because there is no industry standard for hybrid oils. So we've developed our own high spec and we test oils against that standard, which really looks at those critical factors I've talked about to do with intermittency or engine being on off, contaminants, and system efficiency.
That's a great introduction to the tech, but I suppose what we need to know as well is about the practical considerations. Will, I'm going to bring you in at this point and ask you, YouGov has carried out extensive research into hybrids and I suppose the broader consumer attitudes towards them. Can you tell us a little bit more about the kinds of studies that you guys have conducted and what they tell us about, I suppose, current consumer perceptions of hybrids?
Sure. Hi, Paul. Be delighted to. So YouGov, we're a polling company, we're a research, we're a data, we're an analytics business. We've got a panel of millions of people around the world who we are constantly collecting data on. That is people's attitudes, their beliefs, their behaviors across thousands of topics, one of those being cars. And in particular, what car are you going to buy next? And so naturally, we're collecting data on people's consideration towards hybrids. It's interesting, Rebecca was talking about what about 30% of new car sales in the UK being hybrid. Our data is saying about just over 4 in 10 people in the UK who are looking to buy a car in the next 12 months would consider a hybrid. So those two figures, I think, work particularly well and divvy up. To put that in context, though, we're still seeing about 6 in 10 or just over of people wanting a petrol engine, and EVs, about 3 in 10 of the new car buyers would consider buying one of them.
In one of your surveys, you polled that half of UK drivers would consider a hybrid specifically for the benefits to the environment. Presumably, then the other half are kind of skeptical about the hybrid benefits. What would you say, Will, in your coverage that you've done so far, would be the big concerns or misconceptions that consumers have about the environmental benefits of hybrids?
Yeah, that's it's an interesting one. I think specifically on the environment there's two sides of the coin when it comes to hybrids. Certainly, if you look at motivations for why people would buy a hybrid, they do talk about the environmental benefits, as you quoted there. They talk about future-proofing against the decline of petrol or diesel cars. But if you look at the concerns over buying a hybrid, you still see some environmental concerns coming through. So people are worried about battery safety or longevity. They're worried about, so what are the actual environmental impacts of owning and driving a hybrid? And is it actually beneficial to the environment to buy and run one?
Hey, I'm going to throw that one over to you, Rebecca. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a really great question and it's a really complex area. So I can understand why it's a question for a lot of people. So the CO2 emissions legislation is what drives the automotive powertrain technology development. So these hybrids are being developed by vehicle manufacturers specifically because they do bring a reduction in tailpipe CO2 emissions on the drive cycles that are in the legislation. And actually, we've presented externally data that shows that the full hybrid EV and the plug-in hybrid EV do bring reductions in the tailpipe CO2 emissions across multiple industry recognized cycles. And then in the world harmonized light duty cycle, significant reductions in the tailpipe CO2 emissions. As you've said, people are concerned not just about the tailpipe CO2 emissions. And as a scientist and as scientists in Castrol, we are always considering the full life cycle assessment of the powertrain solution. So the CO2 emissions associated with the manufacturing materials as well as in use. Now, there are published LCA studies or life cycle assessments which show that in the full life cycle assessment, an electric vehicle, the percentage of the CO2 emissions from the materials and manufacturing phase is higher. So if you look at kind of the full carbon footprint of the vehicle, a higher percentage of that will be made up of materials and manufacturing for a battery electric vehicle than the other types. That said, there's also same studies published that show if you look per kilometre on a full life cycle assessment basis, then BEVs and all of the hybrid types that we're discussing today can have lower CO2 emissions when driven in Europe on the Europe electricity grid. So in the round, the data says, yeah, the benefit's there.
So there is a benefit, there is an offset for whatever is being produced, and people obviously have concerns about the disposal and replacement of batteries and that kind of thing. But you think that the benefits of green driving outweigh that, would you say?
So, as I say, it's very complex and it depends on, for example, the battery electric vehicle life cycle CO2 emissions will depend on the country it's being driven in, the carbon loading of the electricity grid, but good LCA studies in Europe on a European electricity grid have demonstrated that that life cycle CO2 emissions per kilometre benefit is there.
Okay. I suppose the other thing to consider, and Rebecca, I'm going to throw this one at you as well, just from your industry side, is that alongside petrol and diesel cars, hybrid sales will eventually be phased out in places like the EU and the UK from 2035. So I suppose, how are you seeing regulation evolve in this area, and what do consumers need to know about future planning, I guess?
Yeah, another area of lots of discussions. So overall, we see electrification being the long-term trend for cars and vans, but we are seeing a slowdown in the pace of electrification. And legislation goes through reviews. We're seeing a major review in Europe at the moment of the CO2 emissions legislation. The UK current legislation is very clear that no new internal combustion engine vehicles would be registered from 2035 onwards. So these things are always moving. And what we focus on at Castrol is our contribution. And our contribution at Castrol is actually working with the engine manufacturers, the vehicle manufacturers on developing oils that optimize performance and fuel economy, or reducing the fuel consumption as much as possible from the oil. A great example is we've got one unique oil in Europe at the moment, which is a 0W20 fuel economy oil, and it's the only oil that meets the fuel economy latest requirements from VW, BMW, and MB. So that's where we focus while the legislation moves.
This is probably a good one for you, Will, is that lots of drivers are put off by hybrids and whether or not their performance is going to match the cars that they're used to, or even if they can match EVs. There's a view, isn't there, that hybrids are slower, they are heavier, they are underpowered, and even more unreliable, just because, I mean, specifically, there's more to go wrong in a hybrid than there is in either an EV or an internal combustion engine car. So how are consumer attitudes towards the performance of hybrids reflected in your research?
Sure. And these are quite surprising statistics, actually. If you look in Britain, only 14% of people say that performance or speed is lacking. And if you take that to somewhere like the US, that grows to about 20% of those considering a hybrid in the next year are concerned about a hybrid sort of low speed performance. So yes, there might be this sort of general myth out there, but it's not actually reflected in huge numbers in our data.
So, Rebecca, how does, from your testing, how does the performance of hybrids compare to to EVs and petrol.
Yeah, it's not surprising to me actually that the kind of the consumer feedback doesn't show up this concern about, slow or underperforming, because as we said, the e-motor is often used actually as a power boost for acceleration and, from that standing start. From my perspective, or our perspective at Castrol, it's really exciting technology, hybrid technology. I mean, if we look at F1, so Formula One, pinnacle of motorsports, adopted hybrid technology, and actually as we go into 2026, we're going to see the e-motor delivering almost 50% of the power for those most efficient hybrid vehicles in the world. So we see it being used in the pinnacle of motorsports. At Castrol, we are partners with teams in Formula One, and so we're developing the fuel, the lubricant, the coolant, and we use that as like a fast innovation cycle to develop oils that perform really well in hybrids. And again, really the big focus is on reducing friction further. And whereas consumers might want to use that for fuel economy or fuel consumption savings, in F1, that reduction in friction directly translates to improved power and faster lap times. And so we take some of the learnings, we're testing hundreds of formulations every year, modeling, testing, and then delivering oils onto the racetrack. And we take some of those learnings into our on-road developments for hybrids. As you said, Paul, earlier, we're also seeing hybrid technology in the latest hypercars, the oils and fluids for testing the Zenvo Aurora. Could get that right, Zenvo Aurora. I don't know if you've seen that one. But again, one of the most powerful vehicles in the world, triple E motor with a V12 internal combustion engine. And again, we've provided an oil with some unique patented friction additives that reduce the friction. It's performed well under those really high shear, high RPMs that the engine's seeing. And then we've also supplied the coolant for the battery, and that battery is really impressive ultra-fast charging battery that can get from empty to full in 48 seconds, enabled by one of our thermal management fluids, Castrol thermal management fluids. So we see this as a very exciting area that we can learn from and continue to deliver better performance.
Absolutely. So rather than being the least exciting option, because obviously Ferrari and Porsche, they both produce hybrid cars now. So you're in good company alongside the F1. So any budding Lando Norrises out there will probably be relieved to hear that. One of the other areas, though, of concern, Rebecca, would probably be battery safety and lifespan. I think it's more of a concern in the States, though. What can you tell us about improvements in that area?
Yeah, so we see that as a concern in our own consumer research as well. And we've been amongst first movers into an exciting new EV battery technology, which addresses both of those concerns. It's immersion cooled battery technology, where instead of in traditional batteries, the cooling is from a cooling plate, and then there's indirect contact between a water-based fluid and the cells helping to cool the battery cells. In immersion cooled technology, the battery cells are directly bathed, and then the fluid is moved around the battery cells to manage the temperature of the cells. And this needs an oil-based dielectric fluid that doesn't conduct electricity, but does really effectively take the heat away from the cells.
So if batteries are improving, battery tech is improving. I suppose I'm going to throw this question to you, Will, which is, one of the concerns with both EVs and hybrids is that whole issue of the charging convenience or inconvenience, dare I say it. What kind of research have you uncovered from your conversations?
Yeah, Paul, you're absolutely right. The practicalities are where we start to see sort of more sizable minorities emerge in our data, sort of things that people worry about. As an example, if we take the UK, 31% concerned about insufficient charging stations. 30% worry about the lack of home charging space, potentially dragging cables over a pavement or something. 30% worry about the hassle or time required to charge a hybrid. And we see very, very similar patterns in the USA. 28% of those considering buying a car in the next 12 months are concerned about a hybrid's charging time. 34% of those who consider themselves an environmentalist worry about the convenience of charging when thinking about hybrids or electric cars. So certainly our data plays that out. Practicality around charging and infrastructure, whether that be in or outside the home or home environment, are concerns.
Have you picked up any consumer habits in terms of how people will drive hybrid cars? Is it going to change the way that they view their commute or the way they take on long journeys? Is that something that's come up?
I was looking at sort of some of the stats. The average journey in the UK is something like 8.3 miles. Or something like that, well within the range of most EVs or even hybrids on an electric support. Do we see sort of differences about how people will drive? It's more concerns about if I'm going to take this vehicle on a longer journey, what are the practical implications of that? Will I be able to charge it? And will it do as well as the old petrol or diesel option?
I think it's a great point that the average journey is 8.3 miles. I think that's fabulous that everyone thinks, oh my God, I've only got a range of 57 miles on a hybrid or 62, and you're only going to go to the shops and back. I think you'll probably be okay. Rebecca, what would you say then to drivers that are worried about charging and they see it as a barrier and they might be weighing up buying a hybrid, but they are worried about that inconvenience? How do you put their minds at rest?
I just think that hybrids are kind of the optimum solution for drivers who want to be able to drive an electric vehicle, want to take advantage of those lower emissions, and can be lower cost, but have anxiety about range because no matter the type of hybrid, as we stepped through earlier, the internal combustion engine is always a fallback. So if it's inconvenient or if it's expensive to charge, then the internal combustion engine is there as a fallback. So for me, it's the optimum.
It's always there. Okay. So looking ahead, what would we say is next for hybrids? Given everything we've talked about so far and all the positives that we've outlined, how will hybrids continue to adapt? How will they continue to stay relevant? And as we're all journeying towards electrification, I guess it's something that we have to consider. So, Will, do you see consumer preferences changing in the next 5 to 10 years? I mean, they have to, right?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I was presenting at a conference last week on Generation Z. People born between 1997 and 2012, and trying to use their attitudes as a basis to look into the future. Now, if you look at Gen Z, what are they? What do they believe? And what's their outlook? Well, they are concerned about the environment. 65% say that climate change is the biggest threat to civilization. There's definitely a move there towards environmental and eco-friendly options, especially when it comes to driving. They're digital natives. More than half of them can't get through the day without consulting their mobile. And they believe that things like AR and VR have real world applications beyond video games. So think about that in the sense of buying a car. What does that mean? They're lovers of technology, the new technology, the things that we've been talking about today that Rebecca's mentioned that got me excited. But an interesting one for the automotive market, I think, is Gen Z also have a very strong ethical outlook. So they like it when companies have a moral message. They prefer a long-term connection with a brand rather than a short-term relationship. And they think it's important that brands have a clear and transparent point of view on wider issues in society. All of those things, where does that take the automotive industry? And where does that take the future of hybrids? Well, the environmental concern certainly would drift towards hybrid or electric technology. How do those other two sit? Definitely digital natives and new tech. The ethical outlook, I think that's more around what are automotive manufacturers and those other organizations associated with the industry doing, and how can they back up that ethical stance?
Excellent. Rebecca, Will's done all my hard work for me. I guess my final question to you is, can you talk us through some of the future challenges hybrid are seeking to overcome, and also the technological developments that Will mentioned that are going to appeal to drivers and take hybrids forward in the next 5 to 10 years?
Sure, I will try to. So I think, as I've said, I think overall, one of the big trends that we're seeing for hybrid electric vehicles is the batteries are getting larger to extend longer range. One of the things that this means is these really advanced features actually lead to even higher intermittency, higher off periods. So I talked earlier about this leading to contaminants. So we're seeing really high levels of water, for example, in some of the oils when we're doing our next generation developments with the vehicle manufacturers. And so we have developed completely new additives, completely new formulations that really keep that water emulsified in the oil, keep the additives well suspended in the oil, despite there being water in the oil, so that there's the protection of the critical engine parts that's needed. The other technical area that we'll just continue to focus on alongside the vehicle manufacturers is efficiency. So overall efficiency of the system that directly relates to reduced CO2 emissions. One example recently is Castrol worked with JLR on the latest generation hybrid. Together we tested the oil and really put it through its paces. We started with Castrol doing some fuel economy testing on the oil. That is a science in itself. You have to kind of keep out all the other factors that can impact the fuel consumption, so that you're only measuring the impact of one oil versus another oil on fuel consumption. So we've got some great engineers able to do that. So we started off with the fuel economy testing, and then JLR did some really severe durability testing, 16,000 hours worth of engine testing, and then on-road field trials covering urban and motorway in the UK, in Dubai, in the US. And then that, after all of that testing, that confidently delivers a next generation 0W20 that puts performance and efficiency front and center. And then I think just to play to Will's point that the Gen Z are really interested in more ethical concerns overall. I think having a roadmap, of what we're working on as Castrol for our contribution to sustainability overall is really important. And a big part of that for us is what we call our Path 360 strategy. And within that, we're really driving towards circular oils. So really, oils are not used up at the end of life. The additives are, but the base oil, which is like 70% of the oil, can be reused again and again. And so that can really reduce, I talked about life cycle embedded carbon in product, that can really reduce that life cycle embedded carbon. So we'll keep thinking, well, knowing how important those ethical considerations are to Gen Z consumers.
Fabulous. Gen Z can all get very excited about those developments. On that exciting and positive note, I'd like to think that I'm going to bring this Wired briefing to an end. And I'm going to give our guests a chance to recharge their own batteries as efficiently and sustainably as possible, of course. Rebecca, Will, thank you both for taking part today. And thanks to everyone for watching. And we do hope you can join us again next time for another Wired briefing. Thanks.